I never expected to inherit anything from Grandpa Joe. That's what I told my sister when the lawyer called. 25 years of living in the same house. And the man barely said 50 words to me total. While other kids complained about chatty grandparents who told embarrassing stories at family gatherings, I grew up with a ghost who happened to breathe. He'd sit in his worn leather chair every evening at exactly 6:30, staring at nothing. While family dinners happened around him, like he wasn't there, Mom would try desperately to include him in conversations. Dad, tell Sarah about your Navy days. Silence, Dad. Sarah made honor roll again. A grunt, maybe, if we were lucky. My cousins thought he was mean and bitter. My aunts whispered about depression behind closed doors. Uncle Mike called him selfish after every family gathering. He's choosing to be miserable, he'd say, throwing his hands up in frustration after another failed attempt at conversation. The war ended 60 years ago. It's time to move on. But I just accepted that some people don't talk. Maybe that made me weird too. But I never felt the need to force words out of him like everyone else did, while my brother would bounce around the house demanding attention and stories. I'd quietly do my homework at the kitchen table, stealing glances at Grandpa in his chair. Sometimes I'd catch him looking back, not at me exactly, but in my direction, like he was studying something he couldn't quite figure out. Those moments felt important somehow, even though nothing was said. Here's what nobody knew. I watched him, really watched, when Mom got frustrated with his silence and her voice would rise. I saw his hands clench into fists on the armrests. When Dad raised his voice during their arguments about money or family obligations, Grandpa's jaw would tighten and a muscle would twitch in his cheek. When my baby brother cried in the middle of the night, something soft would flicker across his weathered face before the mask returned. Everyone else saw a stubborn old man who refused to engage with his family. I saw someone drowning in plain sight, fighting battles nobody could see. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, said he left me a single envelope. No money, no jewelry. No family heirlooms that had been passed down through generations of our family. Just a letter with my name written in his careful, old-fashioned handwriting. That's it, my sister asked, clearly disappointed and maybe a little angry. What about the house, the savings account, the war medals in his dresser, all divided among the others according to some formula that made sense to lawyers but not to grieving families? I got words from a man who never spoke. The irony wasn't lost on me, and I almost laughed at the cruel joke of it all. But as I held that envelope in my trembling hands, something deep inside told me those words might be worth more than everything else combined. I just had to find the courage to read them, to hear his voice for the first time in my life. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect for a man who lived in silence. Polite condolences from neighbors who barely knew him, awkward pauses where people didn't know what to say, and relatives sharing the same 3 sanitized memories from 30 years ago. Remember when Joe fixed that fence after the storm? He made the best coffee in the morning. Such a quiet man, kept to himself. I sat in the back pew of St. Mary's, clutching the unopened letter like a lifeline while Pastor Williams gave a generic eulogy about eternal rest and loving families. If he only knew how complicated love could be in our house, how it could exist in silence and misunderstanding for decades. The whole service felt wrong, like we were burying a stranger instead of the man who'd shared our home and our lives. They were talking about someone I didn't recognize, painting him as peacefully quiet instead of painfully isolated. After the service, relatives swarmed the parking lot like vultures, already discussing the division of his belongings. Aunt Linda cornered me near the church steps, her curiosity barely disguised as concern. Honey, what did your grandfather leave you? We're all so curious about his final wishes. I showed her the envelope, still sealed and heavy in my hands. She looked genuinely disappointed, maybe even a little offended on my behalf. Just a letter. That seems terribly unfair, Sarah. You lived with him longer than anyone. You should have gotten something substantial, something valuable, but I was starting to realize that maybe living with someone and truly knowing them were completely different things. My cousins were already making claims on his possessions like they were dividing up treasure. I called dibs on the workshop tools, announced Tommy, rubbing his hands together. Mum wants the china cabinet and the good silverware, added Jessica, already planning where it would fit in her dining room. They were vultures picking over bones, but I couldn't entirely blame them. We'd all been waiting for him to let us in, to share himself with us, and he never did. Or so we thought. That evening, I sat in his empty chair for the first time in my life. The leather still smelled like his Old Spice aftershave and the peppermints he always carried in his shirt pocket. I'd never noticed how worn the armrests were, shaped perfectly by decades of his hands resting there every evening. The silence in the house felt different now, not peaceful like it used to be, but hollow and final. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, my heart pounding so loud I was sure the neighbours could hear it. Dear Sarah, it began in his careful script. If you're reading this, I'm finally free to tell you what I could never say out loud. My heart stopped beating for a moment. You were the only one who understood that silence doesn't mean absence. While everyone else tried to fill the quiet with noise and demands and expectations, you simply sat with me in it. You never demanded words I couldn't give. You never made me feel broken for being different. I had to stop reading because my hands were shaking too much to continue. This wasn't the grandfather I thought I knew. This was someone who had been paying attention all along. Someone who had feelings and thoughts and love he couldn't express. I realized I'd been wrong about everything. The letter continued for 300 pages, each sentence systematically rewriting my entire childhood and everything I thought I understood about our relationship. I have a condition called selective mutism, triggered by trauma from the war. The doctors in 1952 didn't understand it. They told me to snap out of it and be a man. They said I was being stubborn, that I was choosing silence over my family. Your grandmother tried to help, spent hours researching and talking to different specialists, but even she couldn't reach me sometimes. After she died, the silence became my prison. And I was the only one with the key. I remembered all those times I'd brought him tea without being asked, how I'd sit on the floor doing homework while he read his newspaper. I never thought of it as understanding, it just felt natural, like the right thing to do. But apparently, those small gestures meant everything to him. You have a gift, Sarah. You see people's hearts even when they can't show them. That day when you were 8 and drew me a picture of us sitting together. You wrote Grandpa and me being quiet friends. I kept that drawing in my wallet for 17 years. I ran upstairs to his room, something I'd never dared to do while he was alive. His space had always felt sacred and off-limits, but now I needed to understand. In his dresser drawer, beneath folded undershirts and handkerchiefs, I found a showbox filled with things I'd given him over the years. The drawing, now faded and creased from being carried everywhere he went, a Father's Day card I'd made in 5th grade with stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. A photo of us from Christmas morning where I'm sitting on the arm of his chair, both of us looking content without smiling. Every small gesture I'd forgotten, every little gift I'd thought he'd thrown away, he'd preserved like precious treasures. There were birthday cards I'd made with construction paper and glue, little notes I'd left on his newspaper when I was learning to write. Even a dried flower I'd picked for him when I was 6 years old. The others wanted me to be someone I couldn't be. The letter continued in his steady handwriting. They needed me to talk, to share war stories, to be the grandfather they imagined from movies and books. You accepted me as I was, flaws and silence and all. That's the rarest gift anyone can give another person. I was crying now, tears falling onto the pages and smearing some of the ink. I was understanding for the first time that love doesn't always sound like words or look like what we expect. Sometimes it sounds like comfortable silence shared between two people who don't need to explain themselves to each other. Sometimes it's a cup of tea placed quietly on a side table. Or sitting together reading without the pressure to fill every moment with conversation. He'd been loving me all along in the only way he could, and somehow, miraculously, I'd been loving him back in the same silent language. The final page of the letter contained the revelation that would change everything about my future and help me understand my purpose in life. I'm leaving you the one thing that mattered most to me, the knowledge that you already possess. Something extraordinary, your ability to see beyond the surface, to understand without judgment, to love without conditions or expectations. These are the qualities that will make you an exceptional therapist. Though you don't know that's your calling yet, I stared at those words until they blurred together. Reading them over and over again, I'd been struggling to choose a career path, bouncing between different majors in college like a lost pinball. How did he know about my secret dream of helping people? I'd never told anyone about the psychology books I read in my spare time, or how I'd always been the friend people came to with their deepest problems and fears. I've watched you with your little brother when he has nightmares, how you sit with him until he falls back asleep. I've seen you comfort your mother when she thinks no one notices her tears after arguments with your father. You have the same gift. Your grandmother had the ability to heal hearts just by being present. Don't let anyone convince you that quiet strength isn't valuable. The world needs more people like you, people who can sit with pain without trying to fix it immediately. But then came the part that broke me completely. That shattered every assumption I'd ever made about our relationship. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this while I was alive. The words were trapped inside me like birds in a cage, desperate to fly, but unable to find the way out. But the love was always there, Sarah. Every time you sat with me, every cup of tea you brought without being asked, every moment you chose my company over the noise and chaos of the world, you were saving me. You were the only one who understood that sometimes the deepest conversations happen in silence, that presence can be more powerful than words. I thought about all the times I'd wished he would talk to me, share war stories like other grandfathers, take me fishing and tell me about the old days when everything was different. Now I realized we'd been communicating all along in a language only we understood. The silence hadn't been empty, it had been full of understanding, acceptance, and a love too deep and complex for words. He'd seen something in me that I couldn't see in myself, something that would define my entire future. While everyone else in the family was loud and demanding and trying to pull him into their world, I'd learned to enter his world instead, to listen with my heart instead of my ears. That's what he'd been trying to teach me all along, preparing me for a life of helping others who lived in their own silent worlds. 6 months later, I changed my major to psychology with a focus on trauma therapy. Carrying Grandpa's letter with me like a talisman, I kept it in my textbook, reading it whenever I doubted my path or felt overwhelmed by the intensity of the coursework and the weight of other people's pain. My professors were consistently impressed by my intuitive understanding of nonverbal communication and my unusual patience with difficult clients during our practice sessions. Other students would get frustrated when clients wouldn't open up immediately, but I finally understood why these things came naturally to me. I'd been training for this my entire life without knowing it. During my first internship at the local veterans hospital, I met Robert, a 70-year-old man who hadn't spoken a single word since returning from Vietnam 40 years earlier. The other students found him challenging and frustrating, a puzzle. they couldn't solve. They'd try to engage him with questions and activities, growing more agitated when he remained silent, interpreting his silence as resistance or lack of cooperation. I found him familiar. Like looking into a mirror of my past, I sat with Robert the same way I'd sat with Grandpa, without expectations, without pressure. Without the need to fill every moment with words or activities, I brought him coffee in a blue ceramic mug and sat quietly while he stared out the window at the parking lot. I didn't ask him questions or try to get him to participate in group activities. I just existed in the same space, letting him know through my presence that he wasn't alone. After 3 weeks of these silent sessions, he spoke his first words in for decades. "You remind me of my granddaughter," he said quietly, his voice rusty from disuse. She used to understand me too, before the war took that away from both of us. I realized then that Grandpa's greatest gift wasn't the letter itself, though those words had changed my life. His greatest gift was the confidence he'd given me to trust my instincts and embrace my unique way of connecting with people who lived in silence. He'd seen something in me that I couldn't see in myself, a calling to help people who carried invisible wounds, who needed someone to understand their unspoken pain without trying to fix them immediately. Today, I run a successful therapy practice specializing in trauma and communication disorders. On my desk sits that faded drawing of Grandpa and me being quiet friends, now framed and protected behind glass. New clients often comment on it, asking about the story behind the simple stick figures. I tell them it reminds me that healing doesn't always require words. Sometimes it just requires someone who's willing to sit in the silence with you and understand that you're not broken, just different. Sometimes the most profound healing happens in the spaces between words, in the comfort of being truly seen and accepted. Grandpa was right about everything. I was the only one who understood him. But more importantly, he helped me understand myself and find my true purpose. His silence taught me that love speaks in many languages, and sometimes the most important conversations happen without a single word being spoken in the end. He gave me the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that I had something valuable to offer the world, and the courage to use it.